So the first question for the midterm is, how have recent historical events affected the course of research in organizational psychology? And then give an example of an event and the resulting outcome. So there have been many recent historical events that have affected the research in organizational psychology. Dating back to as early as the 1960s, there has been a great increase in science. So two major ways that this was shown was through Taylor with the scientific management of an organization, and then with Weber with the scientific study of organizational culture. So the scientific movement, it really emphasized the industrial side of an organization. So its main focus were on things like recruitment, selection, performance, and training. However, more recently, as the authoritative bureaucratic line between employer and employee was getting smaller and smaller due to things such as unionization and the Vietnam War, it really created the ideology of freedom and challenging the societal norms. So it really emphasized the importance of how to motivate employees, and it gave employees more opportunity to be creative on the job site. So by the 1960s, the organizational side of an organization was just as important as the industrial side. So at this point, there was more research being put into socialization, fairness, motivation, and health and well-being. So this really shows the transition of organizational psychology over those 60 years. So fast tracking to even more recently, something that has really taken research in organizational psychology to new heights is the idea of globalization. So this concept has to do with how organizations are now predominantly, big organizations I should say, are predominantly at the global level, and they're not really restricted anymore to one location or even a country. So because of globalization, this has also increased those organizations' amount of competitors. So because of this, now a lot of research in organizational psychology has to do with how to come up with new and innovative services and products so that organizations can beat their competitors out. It has also globalization has also impacted organizational research by now having to come up with culture research, because different cultures, they react differently to organizational ploys. So this research, it'll affect how well an organization can remain culturally sensitive and inclusive. So the second question is, describe the socialization process for graduate students in your program. Is the program successful in socializing newcomers and creating job embeddedness? So the first stage in the socialization process is the anticipatory stage. So this is when the student has applied to the program, but they have not yet been accepted. So for me personally, being an out-of-country student, I had to transfer my Canadian GPA over into American GPA so that the organization, which was Liberty, knows whether or not I can be accepted within the program. The next stage is the encounter stage. So this is when Liberty, as the organization, they send you a bunch of emails reminding you to do your financial check-in, to purchase the books that you'll need to successfully complete the classes. And this is also when, the employee sees the organization as they are. So this is when the student, they begin their classes and the course workload. So there are various socialization tactics within this stage by the organization. So there are the introductions, where you get to know your fellow employees, the students, and then your supervisors, which are the professors, discussion boards, and then being able to reply to the discussion boards of your classmates. The next stage is the change in acquisition stage. So this is the stage where a employee, they become socialized within the organization. So this takes a few weeks typically, so that you're in the swing of your classes. You know exactly what to do for the various projects and the various assignments that are being assigned to you by your professor. So in this stage, it is really heavily reliant on a student's personal drive to do this because it is an online program. There are other things going on in life. So in order to truly be socialized within the organization, it takes a lot of personal drive on the student's behalf to do so. So some behavioral outcomes. So because we're students and we're being taught by a professor who are an expert in the field, a lot of the behavioral outcomes for us will be custodial behaviors. So custodial behaviors are behaviors where we're doing exactly what's being told of us with little or no deviation. The reason obviously why we do that is because if we deviate too far away from what our professor wants from us, then our grades will be affected because of that. So is the program successful at socializing newcomers and creating job embeddedness? So obviously, like I said, there are limitations to doing this because we are an online program, but I think Liberty has done a good job at socializing their online students. A few examples for me personally were, with my acceptance letter in the mail, I got a little bumper sticker with LU on it, and then I also got a Liberty long sleeve that had LU on it. So this increases my connectedness and belongingness and job embeddedness into the organization, because when people ask me what that means, I can tell them, and I'm now associated with the organization. So the next question is, how can an organization reduce or prevent work-family conflict? So one of the major ways an organization can do this is by setting up work-family policies. So these policies are set in place for employees so that they can successfully balance their work life and their non-work life. So some practical examples of the policies may be elderly care, child care, physical health facilities for employees to work out, and then educational opportunities as well for those who would like to keep learning for whatever it is that they are pursuing. So the thing with organizational policies, though, are that they are only successful if they are paired with good family supportive organizational perceptions. So these are the employee perceptions of an organization that are formed based off of whether the culture of that organization actually allows for the use of the policies. So in research done by Thompson, Bouveau, and Linus, what they found was when the culture of an organization is consistent with the values and beliefs of its employees, the utilization of those family-friendly policies were increased. What they also found was that when it was paired with managerial support or supervisor support, this also increased the likelihood that those policies would be used. So this shows the importance of supervisor support. What was found was that when supervisors or managers, they used the policies, it allowed those employees to see that there is no stigma, there is no embarrassment attached to using those policies if you needed to. So another way that has been found to reduce work-family conflict in research done by Thompson and Ganster is by having a flexible schedule. So this allows employees to realize that, where the organization, they're paying attention to those non-work related activities that you may have and that you may need time for. So it gives employees less time restrictions to do those things. The next question is, imagine you had been asked to develop a performance assessment program for employee development. What techniques could you use to adequately evaluate employee performance as comprehensively as possible? So Murphy's list that was in the textbook, I'll just read off the list here. Paper pencil tests, job skills tests, on-site hands-on testing, off-site hands-on testing, high fidelity simulations, symbolic simulations, task ratings, and global ratings. So the two most common methods of performance assessment in organizations are ratings of employees' performance on specific skills, and then ratings of overall performance on the job. So, however, there are many sources of potential error in performance ratings. Some examples might be that the raters did not have adequate opportunity to see the whole performance of an employee on the job, and then there also might be some bias as well. So a way to make this assessment more objective is by constructing behaviorally anchored rating scales. So these clearly reflect those employees' behaviors that constitute as a poor, average, or great job performance. So this can be done by attaching on a scale behaviors that would be assumed to be, a poor or average or a great performance. So for an example, if you are assessing a professional sports player, how well their career was, you are not going to just look at their career statistics and then judge based off of that alone. So there's a lot of intangible characteristics that a professional sports player may have that would dictate whether they had a successful career. These may be things such as being a good teammate, being a good leader, and having mental or physical health, or toughness, I should say, mental or physical toughness. So another important thing to consider when assessing employees' performance are the three predictors of performance that could influence that employee. So these predictors are the general cognitive ability of the employee, the level of job experience of that employee, and the personality traits of that employee. So these predictors all influence how well an employee will perform at the job, and that we should be remembering when assessing that performance. So I would also want to pay attention to the organizational citizenship behavior of the employee, which are things that an employee will do that are not, in the job description or attached to job responsibilities. So knowing how much or how often a employee does these citizenship behaviors will influence their job performance assessment. So these are all techniques that I would take when assessing the job performance of an employee. So the final question is, what are some possible common organizational constraints, and then how could they lead to counterproductive behavior? So a possible organizational constraint could be the lack of employee monitoring. So although it's a good idea to give employees freedom to be creative and to have initiative over their own time, it also could have the opposite effect where it gives them too much opportunity to do counterproductive behaviors. So if a person has a lot of discretion over their time, they're not being monitored as much, it could lead to counterproductive behaviors more so than someone who may be getting more supervision. So another organizational constraint could be the absence culture of the organization. So if an organization has a culture where taking absence from work is very lenient, very acceptable, then employees may think that it's okay to do that more frequently. So if there's absent policies where where it's not as easy to do so, not as easy to be absent, this may decrease the amount of absence the employees do. So If an organization does not help employees to overcome barriers to attendance, this could also be considered a constraint. The reason being, a lot of times employees, they may not show up to work not because they don't want to, just because non-work related activity isn't allowing them to. So if an organization has no way of helping employees meet those non-work related activities, then this could increase the chance that people, they won't be able to show up to work. So when we're considering the abuse of others in the workplace, a possible organizational constraint that could foster this type of behavior is a stressful work environment or organizational climate, or an organizational climate where there is little norms and values present. So, if the organization, they have no way of making their environment less stressful, this could cause counterproductive behaviors by means of production deviance and withdrawal. If there are no explicit norms within the organization, employees may take advantage of this and act counterproductively because it wasn't specified that they couldn't do those counterproductive behaviors. And then finally, an organizational constraint could be if an organization has abusive employees within powerful positions, such as supervisors or managers. If a supervisor, isn't being very kind to the employees under them, employees may act counterproductively in response to that abuse that they are receiving. So this is because whenever an employee is receiving that kind of treatment, it's always considered a negative. And usually these counterproductive behaviors, they're shown in two different ways. So it may be directed at the organization in response to being responsible for that supervisor, or it may be some form of displaced aggression towards fellow employees. So these are all possible organizational constraints that could lead to counterproductive behavior.